Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells this parable. And a parable, for those who may not know, a parable is basically a story. It's a metaphor where Jesus speaks through a story to get a point across of what he's wanting to say about himself. And so Jesus is telling this parable about a father and two sons. And one of the sons decided that he wanted to go ahead and take the inheritance early. They both were due an inheritance, but one of the sons said, I'm taking my inheritance now. The other son said, listen, I'm going to stay here, work for my father. I'll get my inheritance when the time comes. And so there's these two sons and a father, and we couldn't close out this series, Misdirection, without stopping in Luke chapter number 15 and looking at these two boys and their dad. And so the son that said he wanted to take the inheritance, he takes it early. He goes out, and the story goes that he squandered the inheritance. He squandered all of it and ran out of everything that he had, and he ends up in a field with pigs. But what's amazing is then the son knew to come back home to his father, and that's where I want to look today. Starting at verse number 20, it says, so he got up. Now listen, if you've ever messed up, if you've ever made a mistake, if you don't like where you're at in life, if you don't feel like you're where God said he was taking you, if you feel like the place that you're at today is not the thing that you've been believing for, that God laid on your heart, the first thing you got to do if you feel like you've fallen is get up. The very first thing you got to do is get up. So it says that he got up, went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. They began to celebrate. This is a great story, right? This is a great one to read about. It makes its rounds in the church circuit. If you've been around church any amount of time, you've heard this story. Even if you aren't from a church background, maybe today's your first day in church, or maybe you're joining online for the first time and you've never heard this story specifically, no doubt you have heard somebody allude to the prodigal son. Allude to the son who ran away and lost it all and then came back. But this son had everything. Not only was he impatient, but he was also irresponsible. And so he was impatient and took it all, but then he took it all with him, and he went and he lost it all because he wasn't ready for it yet. So he squandered it. See, sometimes in our life, God has to prevent things from getting to us because we're not ready for it yet. Sometimes in our life, God has to hold things back that we're wanting him to bless us with now because we're not ready for it yet. And he gave it to us now, then we would squander it. If he gave it to us now before we were ready, we would mess it all up. We think that we're ready now. We think that the time is now, but God wants somebody to know that just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. But sometimes he's got to slow it down, because if we got it, we would lose it. We would squander it. So this son, he squanders his inheritance, but then the son returns. And when he gets back, he's totally expecting his dad to sit there and to look at him and to be upset with him and to reject him. He's expecting his dad to tell him he really doesn't want anything to do with him. Like, listen, man, you had your chance. You tried it. You went out. You lost it all. That's it. I gave you your inheritance. You had your opportunity. He expected the dad to be like many of us would be, if we're honest. Like, hey, I gave it to you. You took it. You lost it. Now dig yourself out of the hole. But instead, the father looks at him, and not only did he not reject him, but he accepts him and celebrates him and tells him that he is loved. To the father, none of those things mattered. None of the things that the son had messed up mattered. None of the mistakes that the son had made mattered. All that mattered to the father was that he came back. And so I want to talk to you this morning as we close out this series, Misdirection. I want to talk to you on this subject: 2 wrongs, 1 right. 2 wrongs, 1 right. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for today. And I just thank you again that we have this opportunity to gather, to be here as a family of faith, but also joining online. I pray, Lord, that you would speak to each of our hearts, that you would help us to be open and receptive to what you have to say to us. I pray, Lord, that you would help nobody to see and to hear from me. But God, may they see and hear from you. May we apply what is spoken and see change in our lives. And we thank you for it in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Amen. Now, how many of you have ever had this happen in your life? How many of you have ever gone and gotten a new-to-you car? Anybody ever gotten, like, it's a new-to-you car? Like, it may not be new, but it was new to you, right? You went out and got a car. And the thing about it is whenever we're getting cars, we do all the research and all this kind of stuff to try to figure things out. But have you ever had a car that you went and got and you were all excited about it because you had researched it and it was the one, but then once you actually got it, there were some things about the car that you thought were going to be nice features, but once you actually saw them action in your life, you kind of became annoyed, right? Like you kind of got to where you were like, why is this thing doing this? And why is it operating like this? Like you were excited about it, but then all of a sudden, especially with the technology features, right? Like all the technology features that they have today, because they're coming out with all these features, and don't get me wrong, I'm all about technology. I love technology. I'm all for the advancement of technology. But there are some things that I just don't believe a car is supposed to do for you. One of the things I don't think it should do for you is drive by itself. Right? Like I feel some type of way a little bit because the Jetsons, they made us think we'd have flying cars by now. But I don't want a car that's driving for me because I've had a navigation system one time try to tell me that I needed to turn right. And when I looked to my right, it was literally a cliff off the side of a mountain. And in my mind, if the car would have been driving itself, instead of telling me turn right, it just would have turned right. So why am I going, I'm not going to trust a car with that technology. But there's all these different features that are coming out in cars. And I was thinking back to about a year and a half ago when my wife and I had to get a new for her car because the one we were in had been totaled because we were rear-ended. And so we're doing all the research, we're looking everything up, and we go and we get this car called a Kia Telluride, right? And I was so excited about it. It had all the technology features, but it was also budget-friendly, which I loved because I wanted the most bang for the buck. And so, I mean, it's insurance money, but still, I'm like, listen, let's get the most bang for the buck here, right? If insurance is paying for it, let's get like the top of the line of what we can and what we're doing. And so we go and we get this car, and I was all excited about it, about these technology features that it had, and about the fact it had the captain's chairs that she wanted in the second row, and then the third row, it had a third row, and it was a compromise because we're never going to own a minivan. Somebody's like, never say never. No, let me say it again. We will never own a minivan. If you drive a minivan, that's okay. There's no shame in that. I just personally don't want to look like I'm driving around Shamu. So we're never going to have a minivan ourselves. So we got the Telluride. I just lost some people. It's okay. It's going to be okay. So we get the Telluride because it was kind of the happy medium. But now I kind of have beef with the Telluride because it's starting to make me look bad. Right? It is starting to make my wife saying that I'm not the best driver ever. It's starting to make it look like she's right. And I'm a great driver. But she's always saying that I follow too closely. She's always saying I don't leave enough gap in between me and the car that's in front of me. She says I follow too closely. Where are my people that like to follow cars closely? Let's be honest. Yeah, come on. Because you want them to know, listen, I don't know why you're on a Sunday stroll, but it's Tuesday, and I got somewhere I got to get. So it's like if I'm on their tail, maybe they'll go faster. The reverse of that, though, is if somebody's on my tail, I go slower. But I'm always driving on somebody's tail, and Nicole's like, listen, you don't leave enough gap between you and the car in front of you. And I'm like, I've got it under control. It's going to be okay. And we've had a couple close calls, okay? But I mean, listen, everybody has a close call in some sort at some point or another. So just because I have to slam on my brakes once a day doesn't mean that I'm a bad driver. It just means, that people in front of me aren't going fast enough. And so we get this car, and we're all excited about the features, but then one day I'm driving as the man of my household with my wife and my kids, and we're driving, and all of a sudden, Miss Kia starts trying to tell me how to drive and make me look like a bad driver because we're driving, minding my own business. I had everything under control, and the car in front of us starts to slow down. And then they stop. And then they turn, all without a blinker, right? And so I was going to have to slam on my brakes, but I was slowing down, right? Because I don't want the person behind me to overreact. So I'm slowing down. And all of a sudden, Miss Kia slams on our brakes. I didn't do it. It just slams on our brakes on its own. And it literally swerves the car around, starts beeping at me. It's like beep, 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 beep. Slams on the brakes, whips around the other car. Thought I was going to die. Like the car is possessed, has a mind of its own. It's turning us into like other lanes. And I told Nicole, I was like, babe, the car tried to kill us today. She was like, no, it had to do that because you weren't leaving enough gap. She's like, there was no gap between you and the car, so the car had no choice but to slam on the brakes and to swerve for it. I didn't even know it did that. I didn't even know it had this feature where it like slams on the brakes and it swerves for you. It was news to me. Apparently she knew it. I think that's the reason she wanted it. But it's okay. I'm not bitter about it. But she was like, there's no gap between you and the car in front of you. And the reality is God's love for us is much like my driving in the fact that there is no gap. There is no gap. And that's the first thing I need you to see if you're taking notes this morning. There is no gap. Not to be confused with no cap because I'm 31 and I can't say that. But there's no gap. It says in verse 20, he got up, went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. While he was still a long way off. The father did not wait for him to get all the way back to the house, but while he was still a long way off, the father made the mind up that he was going to run to him because the father's love for him was so great that he wasn't going to wait for him to get all the way back to the house. He didn't have to wait for him to get all the way back to the house. He saw him all the way there because his love was so great that it covered the gap. It covered the gap. Much like God's love for you is so great that it covers the gap. Nothing that the son had done was too great for the father. Nothing that the son had done was too great of a gap, was too far away for the father to come running to his son. There was no gap too great for him to cover. Somebody say no gap. Type it in the chat if you're joining us online. No gap. No gap. There was no gap that the father was not willing to cover. There was no gap that the father's love could not remove. While he was still a long way off. He didn't wait for the son to come back and to work off his inheritance. He didn't tell the son, hey, listen, you got to come all the way back to the house. You got to get in here. You got to work. You got to work your way back into my good graces. You got to work your way back and make up everything that I gave you, that you squandered, that you lost. But while he was still a long way off, the father ran to him. And what you need to know today is you cannot earn that kind of love. You cannot earn that kind of love. You can't earn that kind of love that will run you down. You can't earn that kind of love that will do whatever it takes to make it to you. You cannot earn the kind of love that will chase you down, that will leave the 99 for the one. It's amazing. We love to quote that. We love to sing about it. But yet we live as if the one mistake that we made causes God to forget about us and to care about everybody else who has their life and their act all together. God says, no, I care about the one. It causes him to leave the 99 for the one. That's the kind of love that our Father has for us. Not a love that sits here and condemns you and tells you how terrible, but a love that says, hey, I see you far off and I'm going to run to you and I'm going to meet you because I see you trying to make it back. A love that surpasses mistakes. A love that overcomes setbacks. A love that says, you know what, I'm going to push past the pain. No doubt this father felt pain when his son left. No doubt our Father feels pain whenever we're not doing what we know that we need to be doing. But the Father's love was so great that he said, I'm going to push past all of the pain that I felt. I'm going to push past all of that, and I'm going to go to him. That's the kind of audacious and relentless love that our Father has. A love that cannot be earned. It has to be received. See, you might have made some mistakes in your life that caused you to miss out on some things. It might have caused you to miss out on some achievements. It might have caused you to miss out on some opportunities. It might have caused you to miss out on some relationships. It might have caused you to miss out on some peace in your life. But you can never do so much that it will cause you to miss out on God's love. You can never make so many mistakes that it will cause you to miss out on his love, because he runs after us, even when we're running away from him. This is a Father that is waiting, knowing that the time is going to come when we realize, listen, the life I've been living and the things I've been doing is not it. I thought that was it, but that's not it. And he's waiting for us, and when he sees us, he comes running to us. Notice that he didn't run to him condemning him for everything he had done, because that's what some of us would have done. I'm not even going to ask you to be honest, because I know we're not going to be honest, but some of us, if we're honest, if our kids left us, took everything, ran away, when they came back, we'd be like, oh, I knew they'd be back. Oh, I knew it was just a matter of time until you would be back. Oh, you lost everything. Now you want to come back to me? Now that you've squandered everything on your own, now you see that I was right the whole time? The Father didn't do any of that. He just ran to him. He ran to the Son, and he said, I love you, and welcome home. I love you, and you're welcomed back in this place. You're welcomed home, which is exactly why we, as a church, tell everybody, welcome home. That's why it's on the front doors of the building. It says, welcome home. Because we believe that Elevation Point Church, no matter where you've been in your life, no matter what you've done in your life, no matter the mistakes that you've made in your life, doesn't even matter what you did last night. I don't even care about what you did this morning. But we believe Elevation Point Church is a place that has been ordained by God to be a place that welcomes people home just the same way that he welcomed us home. The same way that we served a God who welcomed us home when we were making mistakes, when we were getting it wrong, we believe that God has created us to be a place that people can come, and when they walk through the doors, because of what they're wearing, they don't feel judged. Because of what they've been doing, they don't feel judged, but they feel loved and accepted, and let them know that you have been living that way, but it doesn't have to stay that way. You don't have to turn people away at the door to get them to live right. If you truly want people to have a heart change for God, if you truly want people to live for Jesus, the thing to do is to let them come in the door, because they've been rejected long enough. They've been told they weren't good enough long enough. They've been told people didn't care about them long enough. They've been told the church gave up on them long enough. The way to see change in people's lives is to open up the door, to let them come in and to see the love that only Jesus can give. A love that nobody else can give them. A love that the world can't give them. But once they get in here, they see the love that Jesus can give. He welcomed us home. Who are we to tell somebody else that they're not welcome home? He welcomed us in our mess. I know we look good today. I know at home, I don't know what you're looking like. You might have some like Lucky Charms or some Cocoa Puffs there in your bathrobe. But here in the building, I know we're looking nice. We got up, we got dressed. But let us not forget where God found us. Let us not forget where he brought us through. Even if you've lived your whole life in church the way I have, you've been through some stuff. You've made some decisions that would not have made your mama proud. You've made some decisions that would not have made God proud. But you serve a God who still loved you enough to not only welcome you, but to say you are called, you are gifted, and I can use you to bring change to somebody else's life. Some of us with the worst stories have the greatest miracles. Some of us with the worst stories have the greatest impact. God is waiting to be used. But for so many of us, we're allowing the mistakes that we've made to hold us back from actually being used by God. We're allowing the mistakes that we've made to disqualify us. This son, he got up and he came back to his father. See, a lot of times we make mistakes and we stay away from the father. The son, he got up and he came back to his father. It literally says in the Bible, he got up and went to his father. This son had messed up. He had squandered everything. He had lost it all. He had lived a frivolous life. But none of that satisfied him, because it never does. And once he had that realization that, hey, this life I'm living is not making me happy. This life that I'm living is not doing everything that I thought it would do. Once he realized that, once he understood that, he said, listen, I know where I can go. I'm going back home to my Father. I'm going back home to the place that loves me. And when his father saw him, he didn't just sit there with his arms folded, but when his father saw him, he came running. He came running to him because God wanted you to know that no matter what you've done in your life, the next thing I need you to see is there's no disqualifications. There's no gap, and there's no disqualifications. Verse number 21, it said, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. The son said, hey, I'm no longer worthy. You don't have to tell me, Dad. I know I'm no longer worthy. People have told me I'm no longer worthy. I know myself that I'm no longer worthy. And the father completely ignored him. Like, Dad, I'm not worthy. I've lost it all. I've made these mistakes. And maybe you're here today, maybe you're joining us online, and you don't feel worthy. Maybe you would never admit it. Maybe you never openly say it. But the truth is, in your life, you don't feel worthy. And that's okay. Because let me tell you something about myself. If I'm being honest for a moment, I don't feel worthy. There are times in my life I do not feel worthy of what God has called me to do. I don't feel worthy of being called a child of God. To be a husband to my amazing wife, I don't feel worthy, me. To be a dad to our two sons, me. To be able to pastor such an amazing group of people in this church, me. So if you're here today, if you're online and you don't feel worthy, guess what? It's okay. You're in good company. But there's good news and there's bad news. And I don't know what type you are. I'm the type, I like the bad news before the good news. But there's good news and there's bad news. And the bad news is nothing that you do can make you worthy. Nothing that you do can make you worthy. I am so glad for everybody who's here today. I'm so glad for everybody who's online today. But guess what? It doesn't make you worthy. I'm so glad for everybody that read their Bible all week. But guess what? Doesn't make you worthy. So glad for everybody that prayed for at least 5 minutes every day this week over your meal because you knew what you were cooking wasn't going to taste good. And you were like, God, I need it to be good. I'm proud of you. But it doesn't make you worthy. But here's the good news. If nothing can make you worthy, if nothing that you do, say, or whatever it may be can make you worthy, nothing that you do can make you unworthy. If nothing that you do can make you worthy of God's love, nothing that you do can make you unworthy of God's love. You are not worthy because of who you are. You're not worthy because of what you've done. You are worthy because of whose you are. Your worth is found in the Son of Jesus and in Jesus Christ who came down to this earth and saw so much value in you. That's what God sees when he looks at you. Your worth isn't found in your accolades and in your titles and in the things that you've done. We focus so much on our inadequacy when God is so much more interested in our identity. We focus so much, we disqualify ourselves so much, but the Father completely ignored him. He completely ignored him. Picture this. The Son's there, and he's outlining all of his failures. He's like, Dad, listen, I know that I'm a failure. I made this mistake, and I made that mistake, and I lost my inheritance, and I've squandered all this, and I haven't been living the way that you want me to live, and I've had to come back with my tail tucked between my legs to come and tell you that I've made a mistake. And he's outlining all of this, and the Father literally cuts him off, ignores him, and doesn't just stop there, but he says, hey, oh, that's great. I hear you, son. That's cool. Yeah, bring my boy the best of everything. It's like, I hear you, son. I hear what you're saying. I hear about the failures. I hear about the mistakes. But bring my son the best of everything. Not just everything, but bring him the best of everything. Don't just bring him the leftovers, but bring him the best of everything. Because what the son had done was not how the Father viewed him. The mistakes the son has made was not how the father viewed him. The father simply viewed him as a son and as a child of God. And someone today needs to know that what you've done is not how God views you. The mistakes that you have made is not how God sees you. When he looks at you, he sees you as a son or a daughter. He doesn't see you as 2020 you. He doesn't see you as 2019 you. He doesn't even see you as 2021 you. Because listen, I know it's a process. I know some of us, we've been working on ourselves for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. I'll keep going, 60 years. I want everybody included, 70 years. Been working on ourselves, trying to get it all put together and everything wonderful. But God doesn't even see you as the best version of yourself. He sees you as a son and a daughter. You are not a disappointment. You are not a failure. You are not a mistake. You are not a letdown. You are a child of God. You're a child of God. He said, listen, bring me the best robe. Not just a robe, but bring me the best robe. Because you are worthy of the best. Not because of who you are, but because of whose you are. You are worthy of the best. As a child of God, you are worthy of the best. Stop allowing your own unforgiveness of yourself to rob you of what God said is rightfully yours. Stop allowing yourself telling you that you don't deserve it and that you aren't worthy and that you can't see it to stop you from seeing what God said is rightfully yours. I didn't say that it's rightfully yours. Your mom that loves you didn't say it. Your daddy didn't say it. Your spouse didn't say it. Your friend didn't say it. But God said you are his child and you are loved and you are worthy of the very best. And it's time to walk through life like it. So many of us are walking through life in our own identity instead of in the identity that we have through Christ. We're walking around feeling like, hey, after the mistakes that I've made, the life that I lived, how could God use me to see miracles take place? How could God use me to see healing take place? How could God use me to speak into my wife's life after the things that I've done? How could God use me? And God said, you're exactly the very one that I want to use. Everything that I told you I was going to use you for is the very thing I'm going to use you for. Doesn't matter what happened, doesn't matter where you came from, but I called you for a purpose. And it's time that we walk like it, that we act like it, that we don't act like we're less than. That we don't act like we don't matter. That we don't act like our calling doesn't matter. But that we walk around knowing that we are who God said that we are. So you have this one son who runs away and comes back. But then there's the other son. And this is the son that we don't talk about a lot. This is the son that doesn't get a lot of attention. And it's the son I really want to focus on today. But I'm going to hurry up because I know I'm out of time. But there's the other son. You got the one son who went away, lost it all and came back. But what about the son that followed the rules? What about the son that was in the house? What about the son that never ran away and squandered his inheritance? You have the one son that ran, but you have the other son that stayed in the house and never left his father. But what's amazing to me is when the son that ran away comes back, the son who was there the whole time feels some type of way about it. He gets upset. He's offended because he feels like his dad is saying the one that ran away is now his favorite. And he's like, listen, I was here the whole time. But my brother, I ain't even calling him by his name, not even worthy of a name. My brother ran away and squandered it all, and he comes back, and you're loving him more than you're loving me. And he feels some type of way because he feels like his brother should be disciplined, should be punished, like his brother should be like excommunicated, kicked out, because he's like, I followed the rules. And as holy as we're being in this moment and acting like we can't believe he would actually feel that way, we too feel that way many times in our lives. Like, God, why are you blessing that person? God, why are you working in their life? God, maybe you don't know. God, I get it. God, maybe you don't know what's happening down on earth, but let me tell you what I heard from Susie, who heard from Karen, who heard from Tashonda. I heard this about that person. I heard that they really aren't worthy of this because of the mistake that they've made. So God, I know that you don't know, but let me tell you about this. They really don't deserve all the things that you're doing for them. They don't deserve the fattened calf. They've been hanging out with pigs. Get them some bacon, whatever it may be. But the son was feeling as if his father had a new favorite. But the last thing I need you to see is that God has no favorites. He has no favorites. There's no gap too great for his love. There's no disqualification, and he has no favorites. It says in verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the field, and when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. And the older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and I never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat. So you have the one son who was out squandering everything, out starving, but then you have the other son who is there and who is serving. You got the one son that left the house. You have the other son that's been there the whole time. You have the one son that was visibly disconnected from the father, and you have the other son who was in the house the whole time. Here's what's amazing to me. Even though one was gone and one was there, they were both equally disconnected from the father. The son who stayed was just as disconnected as the one who left. Because hear me, this is important. It is possible to be in the house and to still be disconnected. It is possible to be watching online every single Sunday and to still be disconnected. It is possible to feel like you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing and following all the rules and obeying every command and still be disconnected from the Father. Because it said in verse 30, but when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. And this is what I believe God wants you to hear today. Verse 31, he said, my son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. You are always with me, and everything that I have is yours. Watch this. The son who was in the house took it all for granted. The son who was in the house with the father took it all for granted. It was all available to him, but he did not appreciate it. It was all there accessible to him, but he didn't appreciate it. The fattened calf was accessible to him, but he didn't appreciate it. His father was there with him, but he didn't appreciate it. But once his brother comes back and he sees his brother's misdirection being used by God, once he sees the misdirection of his brother's life being used to be a blessing, he got all upset. Hear me, you got to be careful not to allow the misdirection in somebody else's life and allow what God is doing in the misdirection of somebody else's life to cause you to forget that God welcomed you home too. Don't allow what God is doing in somebody else's life to allow you to forget where he found you, to forget that he welcomed you home too, to forget that you were in the house too, that you've had it available to you too. The dad said, listen, you're with me all the time, and everything that I have, it's been available to you. It doesn't take a mistake and running away and then coming back to be able to see what I can do for you. like your brother. But you've been here the whole time, and you've taken everything I had to offer for granted. And my prayer is that we not be a church that takes the presence of our Father for granted. That we not be a church that is so busy looking at what God is doing for everybody else that we forget to be thankful for what he's done for us. That we not be a place that allows what God is working in everybody else's life, that we forget where he found us, that we forget he's been with us the whole time, that he's been available to us the whole time, that he's been caring for us, he's loved us the whole time. You had both brothers that made mistakes. You had the one who left, and that was wrong. You had the one who stayed and didn't appreciate it and took it for granted, and that was wrong. But you had the father who was there, who was stable, who said, I don't care if you run, I don't care if you stay, I don't care if you leave me, I don't care if you serve me. Doesn't matter, none of this matters. I am here for you, and I love you the same.